Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Hu. Something that's been on my mind a lot lately has been the complex subject, I suppose, of the military. In an ideal society, or within a world governed by love and wisdom, what role would the military have? And where would it be, and how much would it be, and what would it not be? And in figuring out, or at least suggesting some possibilities for what is the target, what is the center of the target, what is it that we're really aiming for? Perhaps by having thoughts about that, having dialogues about that, we can begin as a people, as a united human family perhaps, to move in a more positive direction. Military conflicts have sometimes been described as the things according to which human history is measured. That we know when this happened because it was before World War II, or before World War I, or between the wars, or whatever, or before this or that particular other war. As much as that may be a common way that life experience is described, I don't think it's the best way, because it essentially leaves us focusing on all that is worst about us and the times when we had the most problems, and I believe the times when we were weakest. To me, the words military strength is an oxymoron, because the military is inherently a sign of weakness. It is when our intelligence fails, and our ability to love fails, and our ability to speak fails, and our ability to engage in mutual respect and fairness fails, that we find ourselves in conflicts, and arguments escalate, and if no resolution is found, it explodes into violence. Between two people, it might be a fist fight. Between two countries, it would be a war. There are so many other more desirable ways of addressing any conflict, shortage, need, or issue that comes up. In a sense, it would be, I suppose it is good if the military is the tool of last resort. But what I'm suggesting, I guess, is that for an international community, for a global community of humanity, the military should not be an option at all. Some of that, simplistically, someone would say perhaps that the United Nations could have a more authoritative role. We could possibly develop a one-world government. I don't know that we have to have a one-world government to do it, but we do have to have a lot more mutual respect and a lot more communication and collaboration. We have to encourage, perhaps move toward everyone in the world being a multilingual person. That it's not just about knowing your own language, but understanding other people's languages and understanding how they think, and the more languages you know, the better. So that regardless of who you meet, you will have some way of communicating, and some way, in some civil way, peaceful way, of allowing for disagreement, and of one person saying, well, I believe this, and the second person says, oh, why do you believe that? And the second person says, well, I believe this, and the first person can say, oh, and why do you believe that? And in understanding each other's reasons, some people don't even know their own reasons. Why do I believe what I do? Some people can't answer that question. There needs to be that kind of self-reflection on an individual level, and then to bring that self-reflection to a societal level. And I recall reading a number of years ago about a particular country where it was described that they had a very, very small standing military, only a couple thousand people, to actually maintain military equipment and bases and communications and files and all the basic infrastructure. But that if the country was ever attacked, the entire country had been trained in national defense, such that they could mobilize over 90% of their population overnight. Which would seem that this was not America, about which obviously perhaps this was not America to have a very small standing military. But it would seem very American to use that idea because, of course, if we go back to the Revolutionary War, the not folk heroes, I don't know if folk hero is the right word or not, the idea of the Minuteman, the person who had a gun above the fireplace in the cabin for hunting food, for doing whatever, and when it came time for defense of home and hearth, so to speak, defense of the homeland, the territory, it was the Minutemen who grabbed their guns and came running. With appropriate education and training, I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't create a similar system now and not have hundreds of military bases to maintain and this incredible monolithic structure that drains so much money out of our economy. But going back to that basic idea, a couple things we need to keep in mind is that, number one, it was for defense. There was no aggression. It was for defending home and hearth so that we could all get back to carrying on our lives. As humanity evolves toward a global community, the question becomes, what if your neighbor is in trouble and asks for your help? On the national level, I would say it's very problematic for nations to assist nations in defense of the second nation's territory. If, just to throw out some wacky examples, we'll use letters. If country A was attacked by country B and asked country C to come help defend country A, my personal opinion is that country C should say, no, as a country we cannot get involved in your disagreement with country B. We will allow, however, that any of our citizens who want to volunteer themselves without our protection, sanction, blessing, or opinion one way or the other, any of our citizens are free to join the ranks of your defensive forces. But it will be your country with whoever volunteers to defend your country fighting for the defense of your country. It will not be nations taking sides until we wind up like World War II with virtually the entire globe divided into two forces, with everybody against everybody. An alternative that a friend and I were discussing was, what if the United Nations was structured in such a way that for a very, very limited number of disagreements on within an international global community, United Nations could intervene. And so I suggested that if 75% of the General Assembly of the United Nations agreed that a country had been erroneously and illegally and wrongly attacked or invaded or somehow assaulted by another nation, that the United Nations, that at least those 75 countries, if not the entire United Nations, would form a global defense force that would come in and remove the aggressors back to their own country. Essentially making it clear that humanity or human history has evolved beyond the point of aggression between nations being any longer accessible. That we have finally come to a place where the countries are the countries, and only the people in the countries will henceforth be allowed to decide if they change their government, if they split into two countries, if they merge into a single country. It will be for the citizens of those countries to decide, and it will not be decided by warfare anymore. I suppose closely on that, which is a whole nother subject we could get into, no more nuclear weapons anywhere. Not for anyone, not anywhere, not under any circumstances. No nuclear weapons, period. Part of dealing with that discussion, of course, is to accept responsibility for the fact that the proliferation of nuclear weapons has very often been because of who had them, who seemed to be a very threatening presence. And so to be part of a global community, we have to accept a certain responsibility for whether we are in fact a threat to somebody else. And if a country is a threat to another country, in a neighborly sort of fashion, to demonstrate mutual respect by saying, we commit ourselves to non-aggression. We commit ourselves to treating you with respect. We commit ourselves to not having weapons that can destroy you, not having more weapons than you. You know, in an ideal world, perhaps 1,000 years in the future, optimistically, perhaps we could even get to a world where there simply were no weapons, because we didn't need them anymore, because we had so developed our relational skills that we didn't need conflict, we didn't need violence, rather to, conflicting ideas, disagreements, arguments, yeah, but we don't need open conflict. We don't need to hit each other. We don't need to shoot each other or stab each other or blow each other up in order to work things out. We have the intelligence to do better than that. It is so weak and cowardly to simply fire a gun instead of being willing to engage your heart and your soul and your mind and the very best of your abilities to find ways for your neighbor to get all of his or her needs met, at the same time as requiring that all of your needs be met. We all share this world. The world is a shared space. If we can pull the militaries back to being purely defensive and not aggressive at any time in any situation, not being the world's policeman as if we were somehow better than everyone else, but to say that if there is to be a world's police force, that it will be a police force that is controlled by 75% of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and not by any, no nation will be allowed to create a monopoly or a dictatorship within that, but that it will be by educating each other and by respecting each other and valuing each other and insisting, on a global scale that everyone matters and every country matters and every language matters. There are things to learn from each language and each culture and each culture's music and literature and art and ways of living that could so empower all the rest of them. But unless there is a whole lot of dialogue and a whole lot of interaction, a whole lot of visiting going on, perhaps it would be a really smart thing if at the end of high school, instead of immediately going off to college, if every high school graduate was required to spend 2 years in some sort of Peace Corps type assignment, living within a totally contrasting culture, experiencing different languages and foods and different economic levels. And I think it would give children raised in wealthy homes a very, very different understanding of humanity to give 2 years of their time to working with impoverished people on another continent, and seeing how those people struggled against their challenges and what kind of ingenuity was employed. It would give an appreciation for each other and an appreciation for the fact that we don't need to shoot and kill each other to do it. in past eras of warfare between nations, those who seem to benefit one's own nation, clan, group, family, were often regarded as heroes, when in fact, to those on the other side, they were murderers, because they'd killed family members of people on the other side. And so you've got both sides in a particular conflict sending people to war, and lots of people die, and then a certain number of people come back, and they're regarded as heroes on one, but the heroes on this side are the murderers on the other, and vice versa. And none of it is necessary. We don't have to keep doing that sort of competing if we can talk to each other and respect each other and understand that the same respect we want is the sort of respect they want. They don't want their family members killed, and neither do we. In the present time that we're making this recording, because of economic difficulties, it's my understanding that huge numbers of people have enlisted in military forces for no greater reason than the paycheck. I mean, it's one employer that is absolutely hiring when at a time when jobs are scarce. The problem with that, in my understanding, is that there is no honor in being a mercenary. And if one is in the military just for the paycheck, one is not defending the homeland, one is a mercenary. And there is no honor in that. And there needs to be honesty about being sent to another country to kill people, essentially being the government's hired murderer. The argument is sometimes raised, what about defending the interests of one's country? The problem with that argument, to me, is that it becomes this loose cannon, this unpredictable blank check that allows for so much evil to happen. And it's very narcissistic, because it looks no further than what's important to me. My nation's interests are threatened by this or that situation, so I have to go defend my nation's interests. Well, other nations' interests have been threatened for a very long time. And if my nation offered no response to that whatsoever, that kind of makes my nation complicit with all the oppressors and all the oppressive circumstances in that country. So if they experienced being the one in need, perhaps it's my nation's turn to be the one in need. And as much as we might object to it, the fact that we might have more guns is no excuse for being unwilling to tolerate the same suffering that we may have encouraged in the other country. But it's not about swapping roles, because that's not going to really help anybody. You know, I've been the one in need and you've been the wealthy one. Now let's switch for a while, and I'll be the wealthy one and you'll be the one in need. Well, what we really want is a world where all needs are met. And then we don't have to steal from each other. We don't have to kill each other. We don't have to compete for things. We simply have to be willing to let it be equal. We have to be willing to say, this is not bad enough for me to kill you. If there are economic interests, we will deal with those through negotiation. We will deal with those through business maneuvers. There are so many other nonviolent ways. Another possibility that seems to be often forgotten, however, that could very much feed into that, is basic human ingenuity. Humans are remarkably inventive, and again and again and again throughout history, if a supply of some sort is cut off, or a business interest in a particular area suddenly dries up and is not there, inevitably, almost immediately, some sort of alternative pops up. It's like, well, we never would have thought of doing it that way. Well, of course, except that as the old saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention. If oil interests in a particular part of the world are threatened, and we decide that we will not go to war for the sake of protecting those interests, rather, we will take all the money that we would have spent defending the oil on the other side of the world, and we'll bring them home, and we'll spend them on solar cells and wind generators and all sorts of alternative energy and better insulating our houses to make our energy needs go down. And simply by reallocating the funds in a peaceful manner, lo and behold, we would find ourselves more independent of what we thought we needed before, but discovered that we didn't need it as much as we thought we did. What we needed was a reason to draw out our own ingenuity, our own inventiveness, and to remember what it is to work together and solve a problem instead of getting violent about the problem. If they do this, oh my God, that would be terrible. Maybe it would and maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it would if we did nothing. And maybe the reason it won't be terrible is because we will remember how to work together, and remember how to take care of each other, and remember how to be there for each other. And maybe the military isn't all that necessary if 90% of our population has been educated to know what to do in the event of any sort of crisis. But if we haven't educated ourselves, it is not the invader of which we're afraid, it's our own ignorance of which we're afraid. And expecting the military to be the reason that we don't fear our own ignorance, that somehow the military will protect us from ourselves, or the government will protect us from our own mismanagement of resources, it's self-sabotaging. It is taking the brain out of our heads and putting it somewhere else, and that can only lead to more problems. And if someone has enlisted in the military for defending their homeland and they are told to go defend another interest, they may need to have the courage, the strength of character to say, no, I won't do that. What I signed up for was defending my country. I don't need to be paid to defend my country, and I will not be paid for being a murderer in somebody else's country. And if someone has made the choice to go and do that, they may still be family, they are still a human being, but I will not support them in doing violence in another country. And you're free to disagree with me on that. I think what I'm valuing is human life, including the life of the enlisted person. Bring them home, because there's so many better things they could do than being over there committing violence. There's a verse I committed to memory a number of years ago that was written by a World War II pilot. He was killed in action, of course, but I have to wonder, what would we have that we don't have in terms of literature if he had not been sent to the war, if he had been allowed to stay home and do his craft of creating poetry and verse and literature. And I mean, clearly a brilliant artist, because the verse has been so repeated and is so incredibly written. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wing. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and undone 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung, high in the sunlit silence I've chased the shouting wind along, and flung my craft through footless halls of air. Up, up, up the long delirious burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. And he was killed in action. And there are so many in the war stories that I've read from various countries that, what were you doing before the war? Well, this person was a craftsman of one sort, and this person was a musician, this person was an engineer, this person was a clothing salesman. All sorts of different things that would have been valuable contributions to the community, but we have wasted so much of the resources within ourselves by sending people off to die. An investment in ourselves, like the honorable martial arts master, is to know that the abilities are for defense only, never for aggression. That what matters is the living of life and the building of collaborative relationships, being at peace with one another, and valuing someone else enough that you are as concerned about their need as you are about your own. That somehow there need to be legitimate ways that all needs can be met. That no one has to simply be the one to do without. We must find a system, a way of living as people in which no one has to be the one to go without. And at the moment there is so much resource dedicated to military aggression and the maintenance of massive military machines. It would be like winning the lottery to take those funds and direct them toward human needs all over the world. Thank you for watching.